Hello, and welcome back to the Okanagan Reader. I'm your host, Jim Bowering. Today's reading is of Chapter 8.2 of Green Comet, the first book in the Green Comet trilogy. Chapter 8 is an hour long, so I've broken it up into 4 parts. In this part, on the way to the square, Elgin experiences a bout of vertigo. It was probably good to get it over with, otherwise the square might have done him in. There are some surprises there, and he meets 2 very different kinds of people. Now, I suppose I should ask you to subscribe and like, period. I would really like it if you would subscribe, and I would especially like it if you would like. I can use the feedback. It would help me to know that anyone's listening and anyone cares. So if you do care, and if you're listening, let me know by clicking a like or even subscribing. Thank you very much. Now time to get on with Chapter 8.2 of Green Comet. So, here we go.
Minder led the way out into the corridor, and Elgin slowly followed him, glancing left and right. The passage tapered toward the vanishing point in both directions with a gentle curve cutting off the view after many hundreds of meters. Elgin had to stop and collect himself as he experienced a slight residual effect of waking vertigo. He focused on a point on the wall directly opposite their doorway and held utterly still. With the comet's microgravity being far less than 1% of that of their planet of origin, there was no way to plant one's feet firmly on the ground to steady oneself. Comet people learned that the best way to settle things down was to concentrate on a fixed point in the middle distance. Normally it was never a problem for Elgin, but no one was immune to post-hibernation vertigo. So he stared at the opposite wall, about 30 meters away, and waited for it to pass. It was a mild event, and it didn't last long. Minder waited patiently, as one did on these occasions, no need for concern and no need for comment. When Elgin was ready, in less than a minute, they set out again without a word. They went to the right, pushing off from the doorstep launching block. With some minor adjustments to attitude and trajectory, they were soon coasting at 2 meters per second, about 5 meters out from the wall. It was a leisurely pace, but it wasn't very far. They could easily cover the 2 kilometers in less than 20 minutes. The microgravity caused a slow sinking toward the floor, and the drag of the air gradually decreased their speed, but neither was going to tire Elgin unduly. They continued to fly in silence. Elgin's eyes were traveling over the corridor, taking in the lines and angles. His engineering instincts asserted themselves, causing him to pick out more details in the construction. This corridor was new to him, built while he was asleep, no doubt. He looked at it even harder now, as one engineer assessing the work of another. He followed the near wall down to the floor and up again, over 20 meters to the ceiling. He looked over at the other wall and followed its tapering perspective forward. He saw the ceiling stretch ahead, approaching and disappearing behind the floor as it curved down out of sight. It looked good to Elgin, and that expressed itself in his body as it always did. Whether abstract specifications, scale drawings, or the finished product, Elgin could feel when it was right. This corridor felt smooth. The comfort he felt in his body, as if everything was where it should be, all his bones perfectly aligned and in their proper places, told him it was good workmanship. He felt glad to see that the engineers, with whom he still felt an allegiance, were as good as ever. The comet was okay. "You've got a nice look on your face," Minder said. "What are you thinking about?" "Oh, I was just looking at the engineering work here." He took another look and gave it a satisfied nod. "They did good work. It made me feel good to know the comet's still in good hands." He smiled happily at Minder. "Just as I'm in good hands." Minder made a face. "I know my work is important and all that, but I just can't see how you can compare it to this." He gestured at the grand dimensions of their route. "I can only hope," sighed Elgin, "that your vision improves." Minder grimaced, but it was much a smile as anything else. "So, how do you feel?" he asked in a conciliatory tone. "Are you getting tired or anything?" "No, I'm fine. It feels good to get out and stretch my legs, so to speak." They were stretched out behind him as he glided along, but they weren't getting much exercise. "Very funny. What? Oh, right. Sorry. Never mind, I'm very happy with 4 arms." Elgin looked at Minder's peculiar outline again. It actually did look more efficient. It was more compact, more practical looking. He had no trouble forming an intellectual understanding of the advantages of the modification, but he couldn't make the emotional leap to imagining having it done to himself. "I can see that. You look very comfortable. Obviously it's going to take a while before it's old hat to me, though." "Well, I hope you're a little bit used to it anyway, because there will be people in the square, and probably most of them will look like me." Elgin nodded, then looked ahead with anticipation. He could sense that they were nearing the square. He could feel the space opening up just beyond their sight. There were subtle, nearly subliminal cues in the air pressure gradients and in audible sounds as well. They created the impression of relative looseness in the air ahead compared to behind. Soon they could see the opening where their corridor led out into the square. They began to be able to resolve the sounds into distant voices and to see details in the buildings on the far side. When they broke out into the open space, they came to a stop a few meters in so Elgin could have a look. The square was indeed square. The opposite wall was 200 meters away, its facade of windows and terraces stretching up another 125 to the ceiling. Elgin instinctively approved of that golden ratio. There were entrances to other corridors like theirs spaced all around, with theirs being in the middle of their wall. The corridors fed into the square at floor level, although in a space this size one could as easily call it the ground. The walls had ornamental columns reaching up the first 10 meters with friezes at their tops which continued around the walls. There were a few dozen people in the square, some traveling through while others seemed to be there for its own sake. Directly across the square they could see a group of children in the company of an adult, apparently on a school field trip. The children, about 20 of them, were in a constantly circulating swarm that moved this way and that in a random walk, while the adult calmly pointed out the square's important features. They seemed to be making their way in spite of everything in the general direction of the middle of the square. Elgin could see that there was something there, some kind of installation or display. He glanced at Minder, who nodded, and they began to move slowly in that direction. As they got closer, he saw that there were several statues, and he tried to think who they might be of. The squirming cluster of children got there before they did and immediately surrounded the statues, blocking their view of them. They had to get almost right up to them and then make their way around to the front before he could identify them. Elgin gasped when he recognized Frances, looking almost as she had when they were young. She was standing in her familiar speaking pose, a subtle look of motherly love and concern on her face. Elgin looked at Minder, who was observing him closely. Standing at Frances's shoulder was another statue. It was of a man with a warning scowl on his face and one wing cupped protectively around her back. He looked at Minder again, the beginnings of a scowl on his own face. "Is that supposed to be me?" "Yes, Elgin." Elgin looked at the statues again, back and forth between for a while, then a long, penetrating stare at the face of Frances. "She never looked like that." "But it looks just like her. It was done from real images." "It might look like her," Elgin said, getting lost for another long moment. "But she never looked like that." Minder couldn't see what he meant, couldn't figure out what he was saying. "Elgin?" "Well, that look on her face, it's too soft. She never looked like that when she was speaking, especially during the debates over the separation." Elgin fell back into his reverie, speaking quietly, as if to himself. "Her face had steel in it, and her eyes had fire." He smiled at the pain of memory. Minder was surprised. His picture of Frances was based largely on this statue. He had just assumed it was right. "Well," he said weakly, "artistic license?" "Artistic license? Who gave them license to lie?" Elgin was getting agitated. It looked as if he was about to say more when he was surrounded by a fluttering swarm of children. He spun around, surprise approaching alarm in his face. "Children!" It was the adult who was tending them. "Where are your manners?" They listened to her and dropped back, giving him some space. They still surrounded him, and they were staring at him, most of them agape with wonder and curiosity. "I'm sorry," she said. "They always love to come here and look at the statues, and seeing you—" Elgin glanced at Minder, who looked half worried and half relieved. He looked at the children, whose expressions varied from eager to frightened. That shocked Elgin badly, to see fear in the faces of children, especially if the fear was because of him. Frances would be horrified. Elgin looked at her likeness again, and was ashamed at his earlier reaction. She would have looked like this if she was talking to children. She loved them, a feeling intensified by her decision to not have any herself. Elgin turned to the guardian and said, "It's all right. They just startled me." He smiled at the children, who surged forward, fear forgotten. The children were in a constant swirl of motion. They all wanted to be close to him, preferably in front where they could look into his face. As with any system of energetic particles confined to a small space, this resulted in collisions and much jostling. Their little wings were flapping constantly, raising a small wind and occasionally slapping Elgin around the head and shoulders. He was ducking and grinning. "Children!" cried their guardian, almost laughing, trying not to. "It's okay," said Elgin, laughing out loud, making it okay. The children shrieked, giddy with the joy of the moment. Elgin reached out and patted a few heads, and they began to calm down. When things were more or less normal, he asked them, "You come here a lot, do you?" 20 little voices combined to convey their answer. One boy said excitedly, "We like Frances." "Of course you do," said Elgin. "Everybody does." Another one blurted, "Are you really Elgin?" And another, "You were with Frances, weren't you?" "Of course he was," declared another. "Where is she? If he's here, where is she?" One small voice said, "Is Frances dead? Is she?" All their faces asked him, "Is she?" The smile froze on Elgin's face. It was only by force of will that it didn't disappear altogether. He would not show his hurt or anger to these children, not here so close to Frances. But it didn't do any good. They knew anyway. They were pulling away from him, their faces full of apprehension. Some of them turned on the one who had said it, punishing him with words and blows. The guardian was trying to usher them away, her arms spread like a shepherd. "Wait." Elgin found his voice. "Wait." They stopped moving away and turned to face him solemnly, all but the little boy, apart from the crowd, curled in on himself. He looked so miserable that Elgin felt the pain in his own stomach. He held out his arms. "Come here," he said. The boy looked at him but didn't move. "Come on. I'm not mad at you." The boy looked at the other children who were glaring at him. He looked at the guardian, who nodded. He looked at Elgin, searching for any sign of anger. When he saw none, he slowly, cautiously moved closer. When he was within reach, Elgin gently took his hand. "You didn't ask a bad question," he told the child. "It just caught me by surprise, that's all." He gestured at the statue of his beloved. "I just miss her so much," he said, his voice suddenly shaky. Alarm filled their expressions. The boy grabbed Elgin's hand, shaking his head. This Elgin wasn't like the statue, strong and unfeeling. This Elgin could feel sad, just like him. He came close and said, "Me too." The other children crowded back in, murmuring their support. They had never known Frances, not really, but they knew a lot about her. They heard the stories, grown to legends, about Elgin's powerful love. So seeing him now, seeing how much he missed her, they could understand. And it helped. The strong flood of simple, childish sympathy bolstered Elgin's spirit. It also magnified the presence of her spirit and helped him to respond to their curiosity. He told them a story of a time when he and Frances were young, a time before the awful circumstances that made them famous. Frances took a group of kids, a lot like this group here, on an outing. There weren't any statues then, so they didn't come to the square. Instead, they went swimming. Elgin painted a good picture for them. They could see her golden fur glistening with water droplets. They knew just what she looked like as she watched them swim. They laughed at the other kids' antics. In a few minutes the sadness was forgotten, and Elgin had another 20 people who would love him forever. Their escort gave Elgin a look that conveyed an apology for the intrusion, sympathy for his loss, gratitude for his actions, and an enigmatic combination that he saw a lot but could never really interpret. Miner noticed it and saw admiration, respect, even love. But there was also a strong shade of awe, with something else strongly associated that he reluctantly realized was fear. That was something he'd have to think about. The children were finally shepherded away, waving and calling his name as they went. Their commotion and the excited chirping of their voices turned heads all over the square, until they disappeared into the mouth of a corridor. A small group of adults had to move aside to let them by, and they stared in Elgin's direction afterward. "Well," Miner said, raising his eyebrows at Elgin, "how about that?"